Hello and welcome to the Duskmourn limited set review. Today I am discussing the white cards and how good I think they're going to be in limited with a focus on draft specifically. If you haven't been here before, these are the tiers that I use to evaluate cards. Tier 1 is good, Tier 5 is bad. Feel free to take a look. There's sort of more details about what the tiers are supposed to mean. They enable sort of a flowing discussion about how good I think the cards are going to be and where they may or may not find a home in the format. I'm going to get started with Acrobatic Cheerleader. It's a 1 and a white 2/2 with survival. At the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, put a flying counter on it. This ability triggers only once. So we've seen several variations on sort of this like 2 mana 2/2 white creature that can get flying at some point during the game. I think this is one of the weaker versions. I don't know. Maybe this is one of the. I don't know. They are all sort of medium, and um, I'm not really a big survival believer. Like, I'm not a huge believer in the survival mechanic, just in general. We'll see. Like, this is one that's like, oh, you play this on 2, and then it gets in, and then on turn 3, you have a 2/2 flyer for the rest of the game, which is pretty hard to deal with, and like maybe I should move it up a tier. I guess it does have those starts. I originally had it a little bit higher. The reason I moved it down is I was like, oh, it kind of just dies. It has no synergy with enchantments. I think enchantments are sort of the place to be. So the survival deck is not a deck I believe in. So card with survival, should I be believing in it? It's like, well, it's just kind of like a fine 2-drop in white. It doesn't do anything. The one concern I do have with this is like in the mid to late game. Like if you topped at this, it's a nightmare, right? Like if you draw this as your 4th card, like off the top, you're just kind of down a card because this doesn't really ever get to attack in the most part. But there are other ways to tap your things with survival. It's kind of like presenting a clock if your opponent doesn't have the ability to block it on turn 3. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, all right. I think we go back up. I think tier 4 is probably well, but like I'm like where am I going to take this in the draft? Am I going to take this like speculatively? Probably not. All right, I'll just leave it in tier 4. If it ends up being tier 3, that's fine. Um, Very similar spot for Cult Healer. 2 and a white for a 3/3 with Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you unlock a room, it gains lifelink until end of turn. Now, the reason I have this higher than the 2-drop, which I should probably just swap them just because they cost 2 and 3 mana. They're sort of in very similar spots where I'm like not excited about either of them, but I would say that lifelink is probably more like this is easier to trigger than survival, right? Like this doesn't rely on your opponent not being able to block. This doesn't rely on it has fewer factors that are externally like motivating about it. And lifelink is really powerful. It only really needs to trigger one time, and then you kind of did it. And you're going to be able to play tons. You're going to be able to trigger this a lot. I think the Eerie stuff is going to come up a lot. This isn't so bad as a 3-drop that you doesn't do anything by itself. I don't think it's busted or anything. I don't think it's super premium. It's tier 3. I think it's average. And that's where I'm going to leave it for now. Dazzling Theater / Prop Room. So Dazzling Theater, creature spells you cast have Convoke, and that's 4 mana, and Prop Room, 2 and a white for a other side of the room, untap each creature you control during each other player's untap step. So, obviously not really a card that's designed with limited in mind. It doesn't really do a whole lot. It does not impact the board really in any way, and is just too slow. So, giving your creatures Convoke is for 4 mana is not worth a card. Dollmaker's Shop is important on one half of the room enchantment, and whenever one or more non-toy creatures attack a player, create a 1/1 toy artifact creature token, and then the Porcelain Gallery is 4 white for a creatures you control have base power and toughness each equal to the number of creatures you control. So obviously it allows you to make a bunch of tokens, and then you get to make all your stuff really big. I put this in tier 2 and not tier 1 because it has there's your opponent can get out from under it. Because it doesn't work with toy creatures. If your opponent does kill the one thing that was able to get in attacks, you can get stuck with this, and so you're not actually just still it doesn't chain forever off itself, which some of these effects do. This one does not, and for that reason, I've kind of bumped it down a little bit. I think it's still a very good card, um, and it's going to generate value. And there are some spots where, oh, you just cast the 6 mana mode, and your opponent is now faced with a bunch of 4/4s, and now they're really sad. If you have both modes online, it pumps a creature when it attacks, which is good. I think it is a good card, but I just don't think I kept it out of the upper echelon because it does need help. Emerge from the cocoon, 4 and a white for a sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You gain 3 life. So it's reanimate spell. Reanimate is supposed to be, in theory, a supported archetype in this set for limited. It generally doesn't work. This is the first time they've actually actively tried to support it. I don't know the last time they actively tried to support it, but it hasn't been since I've been back playing Magic. So we'll see. We'll see if Reanimator can work. I'm not a believer up front. Clearly, I have this card in tier 4. I don't think it's amazing. I mean, gaining 3 life is nice, but it's not worth 4 mana to reanimate something is kind of something they print in Masters level sets, and 5 mana is something they print in Standard level sets. So this doesn't bridge the gap for me in terms of being a good reanimate spell. I think with all of the focus around it as a supported archetype, there may be enough support around it for it to be playable, but I think in your average, just a random white deck, this is going to be bad. Enduring Innocence, 1 white for a 2/1 with lifelink. Whenever one or more other creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn, and when it dies, if it's a creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment. So this won't cause any rules problems, surely. There's a cycle of these. But yeah, this one is one I like quite a bit. It continues the chain of cards like this. Takasia's Welcome. We had Caretaker's Talent, similar type cards where those did not come with a body attached to them, although the Caretaker's Talent did. But this one didn't come with the Takasia's Welcome didn't come with a body attached to it, and this one does. So that would be a negative if your opponent could remove it, which they really can't because it just comes back as an enchantment and then whatever. So this is good. This is a good card. I don't think it's tier 1 because it's double pipped. That's really the reason it's not in tier 1. I get nitpicky when it comes to tier 1 grades. If you were playing mono white, I think this would be a tier 1 card basically. But mono white, not really a deck that you draft very often. Ethereal Armor. Single white mana for an aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control has first strike. So I think this is actually going to provide a pretty significant buff. It provides +1/+1 by itself, obviously, because it's an enchantment. And there's going to be enchantments and rooms just kind of sitting on the battlefield. So I think this is going to give +3/+3 a lot of the time. It doesn't solve any of the problems that auras innately have, so I am leaving it in tier 3 as kind of a cautiously optimistic about Ethereal Armor, because normally auras, that don't have some sort of ETB or lasting impact on the board are going to get placed lower than this. The reason I have it in tier 3 is that it is kind of a build around, and in the deck that it's good in, it's great. It's one of the best cards, but you do need to kind of, you need to be ready to play this card. You can't just jam it in any deck. Exercise. 1 and a white for a sorcery. Exile target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. So yeah, this is really, really good removal. It hits pretty much everything in the set that matters. You can get rid of the enchantments, the big creatures, artifacts even, which there are some. There's not a ton, but there's more artifacts than usual because of the delirium nature of the set, and the fact that it exiles is kind of the key point that moves it from tier 3 to tier 2, in my opinion. I think it's very, very solid removal. Fear of Abduction. 4 white for a 5/5 flying. It's an additional cost to cast it. Exile a creature you control. When it enters, exile target creature an opponent controls. When it leaves, put each card exiled with it into its owner's hand. So this is really, really sweet. I did sort of debate this and you're like, why is this in tier 1? Some of the other stuff's not in tier 1. The reason this one's in tier 1 is that it's an enormous creature that is on the battlefield. So yes, you'd need to exile a creature you control to cast it. The thing is, it's going to be like there are going to be some spots where you can't cast it, you know, where you have to kind of play with this card in mind, right? You can't just be like trading off every single one of your guys if you have one of these in your hand. Um, you kind of want to be more likely to not block when you have this card because you do want to make sure you can cast it. But when you can cast it and you get to exile your opponent's thing and your thing, we've seen effects like this before, like the one from SNC, the Ligrella, where you get your thing back, or no, maybe it's not Ligrella, maybe it was something else. Maybe it was Ligrella, I don't know. But you can have it so that you get your thing back and they get their thing back. But this one actually puts it back to their hand, which is really good. Obviously, you can retrigger ETBs, or you can see that as a negative, but you get to retrigger your own ETBs, and that's a positive. So I think this looks really good. Obviously, like this is one of those cards that like could just be dead wrong, right? Could just be completely wrong. There's also the mode of reanimating this. That's just part of the reason it's in tier 1. It's like if Reanimator is functional, this is one of the best cards to reanimate because you don't have to pay the cast trigger and you just get to exile their thing for free, essentially. So that is another angle about this card. It can get you value, and it can also be a removal spell. Fear of Immobility. 4 and a white for a 4/4. It is an enchantment creature. When it enters, tap up to one target creature. If an opponent controls that creature, put a stun counter on it. So this is just a nice sort of like role player 5-drop. We've seen this effect before. It's a Berg Strider type card. We've seen it more recently in blue. These 5-mana 4/4s that tap something down and put a stun counter on them, and they tend to be okay. Like they're just playable cards. And this one has all the right sort of like extra bonuses that I would want to have this card in my deck. I think this is not actively bad to have in your deck as a 5-drop, and that's why it's in tier 3. Fear of Surveillance. 1 and a white for a 2/2 with Vigilance. Whenever it attacks, surveil 1. So this being an enchantment with Vigilance, I do think actually is pretty nice. Specifically being an enchantment, I think, is kind of the thing to think about with it. Yes, we've seen 2-drops kind of like this before. The one in LCI was very bad because it was A, it didn't have Vigilance, I don't think, and B, it scryed one when it attacked, or when it became tapped, which I think this is better than that effect, and is an enchantment, which is a type that matters more in white than Artifact did in LCI. And I think that card was kind of like somewhere between tier 3 and tier 4, sort of in that middle, that okay but not amazing range. And this card I feel is sort of similar. Friendly Ghost. 3 and a white for a 2/4 flyer. When it enters, target creature gets +2/+4 until end of turn. So, again, coming off the heels of Bloomburrow, this looks a lot like Tree Guard Duo to me. It doesn't have the upside, but it doesn't have as much of the downside, right? It's a flyer, so it's always going to be impactful into the late game. It doesn't give Vigilance, so like it does have like I've rated it the same as I rated Tree Guard Duo by the end of that format, which is a tier 3 card, pretty solid card, not amazing. I do think this format is going to be a little less conducive to just cards like this. Like if you put Tree Guard Duo in Duskmourn, it would be worse because there's not any like blinking or any like ways to do anything with this. This is just kind of like a card that's doing its own thing. It's theoretically enabling your survival mode stuff, so that's kind of what this does, and I actually think it does that pretty well. So I think this is going to be okay. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. Tier 3. Ghostly Dancers. 3 white for a 2/5 flying. When it enters, return an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand or unlock a locked door of a room you control. And at a 0, whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, create a 3/1 spirit creature token with flying. So this is obviously busted. I graded this card before I'd gone through the set looked through the set like 4 times. There's a lot of rooms that you can just have. Like, I do think that play this, unlock a room, get a 3/1 flyer is going to be happening. That's pretty a cheat. Like, to think that that's not going to happen a lot is probably wrong. And so I think I should move this back up into tier 1 because, I mean, you do need, the thing with this is you do need rooms, right? Yeah, I'm going to move this back up to tier 1. It's incentivizing you to do things that white is already doing, which is playing enchantments and specifically rooms. And I think I think this is just going to be something like this kind of becomes your deck, right? It's kind of like, oh, I have this in my deck, so I'm just playing like all the rooms, and then on turn 5, I'll have a room in play that I'm getting to unlock the room for free, essentially. Like a 2/5 flyer for 5 is bad. Like that would be like a tier like an unplayable card, but I just don't think that this misses very often. And I think that the fact that you could you're getting the mode of unlocking a room is just so good when you play this in ETBs. And in some game states, you just get something back from your graveyard, and it's just a beating. So I really like this. Glimmer Seeker, 2 and a white for a 3/3 with survival. At the beginning of your second main phase, if it is tapped, draw a card. If you control a Glimmer creature, if you don't, create a 1/1 Glimmer enchantment creature token. This to me looks very medium. We're kind of combining the enchantments plus survival a little bit, which is generally not where you want to be. 3 mana 3/3 is fine. It's not great. But this threatens to get value. You know, it again, there are ways to tap, but it's not. It's really the way to tap is primarily going to be attacking. So I think for the most part, and you know, getting the 1/1, it's good, but is it like game-breakingly good? No. So I think that like having to get that second trigger with this is kind of a concern. So I've put it in tier 3, and I think it's okay, but not amazing. Grand Entryway is a room enchantment. When you unlock this door, create a 1/1 white Glimmer enchantment creature token. An Elegant Rotunda is 2 and a white for the other side of the room, and when you unlock this door, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So I really love this card. It's very apparent. I think it should be very apparent why I love this card. It's just a lot of material for 2 or 3 mana. Like, I'm a noted Travel Preparations hater. I think Travel Preparations was one of the most overrated Magic the Gathering cards of all time. I think it was good, but not great. Everybody thought it was like one of the best cards ever. They brought it back for Shadows of Innistrad Remastered. It was average. It performed at an average level. I think that obviously there were some play issues there. It's like, oh well, people, players are bad, so it's not doing as good. I think that's partially true, but I think people really did downplay sort of the risks of having a card that doesn't do anything if you don't have creatures on the battlefield. This solves that problem and also gives you a lot of value. Now, I want to be very clear. The upfront cost of both of these rooms is extremely expensive, but we just saw, and there's other ways to unlock rooms that get benefits out of triggering your rooms. So I think when you begin your game with this on the battlefield on turn 2, your opponent's just gonna be in kind of a rough spot because you're just kind of sitting they're always thinking, oh, that Elegant Rotunda could get activated at any time. And there's some spots in the mid to late game where you go, no, I actually want to play this, give my stuff 2/+1 counters, and then I get to have an attack in the mid game. Like that's really strong as well. So this card actually plays particularly well with the lifelink Eerie guy because you can play the Eerie guy you could play this on 2, play the Eerie guy, play the Rotunda on 3, and then attack. Obviously, your opponent can remove stuff to deal with that, but you don't. You're not obligated to play into open mana. Like you don't have to. I know that some people feel like you have to. You do not have to do that. So don't do it unless you have to. So, yeah, I really like this card. I think this card is very does a lot. Hardened Escort, 2 and a white for a 2/4. When it attacks, another target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Yeah, this is really bad. So it's a 2/4 for 3, which is not good, and it has to attack to do anything. And when it attacks, if you don't have another creature, it does nothing. So I'm really not excited about this. It has no relevant types. It doesn't have any relevant mechanics. Yes, it's supposed to help enable survival, but it's just not the best way to do that. And there's no, I don't love it. Jump Scare, single white mana for an instant. Until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+2, gains flying, and becomes a horror enchantment creature in addition to its other types. Which is kind of weird. I don't know why they made it so it becomes an enchantment. There must be some reason for that, but I don't know what it is. That will get somebody at some point for some weird rules interaction. This is just a good trick. We see 1 mana +2/+2 and flying. Just 1 mana +2/+2 tends to sort of be good. 1 mana +2/+2 flying, great. Can just end games by itself. We've seen Aerial Boost as kind of like a good comparison to this. We just had Crumb and Get It. I think this is basically the same as Crumb and Get It. It trades some of the survivability upside for a late game closer finisher upside. I think that's kind of similar. I think it is worse than Aerial Boost because Aerial Boost was 0 mana sometimes, which 0 is a lot less than 1. So yeah. We have reached our first Leyline. Leyline of Hope, 2 white for an enchantment. If it has the Leyline text, so if it's in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. Really great design, Wizards of the Coast. Just keep making these. Everybody loves them so much. If you would gain life, gain that much more life, +1 instead. As long as you have 7 or more than your starting life total creatures, you control get +2/+2. Of the Leylines, I will say that this is probably the least bad one for limited. It is still unplayable. It is still completely unplayable because they don't do anything. You basically are mulliganing by having them in your deck or in your opening hand. So yeah, don't play the Leylines. Lionheart Glimmer. 3 white for a 2/5 with a ward 2. It's an enchantment creature. When you attack creatures you control, get +1/+1 until end of turn. So we've seen this before. I think we had one come in with those 4 mana, something like this. That was an MKM. That card actually overperformed a bit because you can kind of treat this as if it's an ETB. This one I like, but I don't love, right? 2/5, not a stat line that's super amazing. Yes, the ward 2 is nice, but it being an enchantment is good. I don't know. I think this is a good card, but like a card that I wouldn't be super thrilled to be starting my draft with because you just, it's not providing you with any help other by itself, right? Now, and that's not to say it's bad or anything. I'm not saying it's just an unplayable card, but I'm just saying that I think it's not quite in that upper echelon of I think I probably would rather have the 2-drop Room than this, just because it's cheaper, really. And then Modern Limited, the mana cost in the top right matters a lot. So I think this is fine, but not amazing. Living Phone, 2 and a white for a 2/1. When it dies, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with power 2 or less from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is kind of a hallmark of why I don't believe in the power 2 or less deck. If this was an ETB, oh yeah, we would be all in. This would be a tier 2 card with me if it was an ETB. Because it's a dies trigger, I basically think it's unplayable. I don't think tier 5 is actually a real, should it be in tier 4 instead of tier 5? Maybe. I don't know. The thing is, your opponent can just ignore this. There are sack things in black or red, so maybe it's supposed to do that. It's such a bad rate. The problem with dies triggers is that if you ever find yourself chumping just to enable the dies trigger, that's a disaster. And that is kind of how I see this card playing out a lot of the time, where it just kind of hits the battlefield. I'm looking at it, I'm okay, I'm going to ignore this because it doesn't do anything on the battlefield. It has no relevant battlefield abilities. And I just don't. I don't know. It's just really slow. It's really slow. It's really small. I don't like it. Optimistic Scavenger. 1 white mana for a 1/1 with Eerie. Whenever an enchantment enters, or whenever you fully unlock a room, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Yeah, this is really good. So it's just a 1 mana engine that, again, it does need some help, right? So I'm kind of what I'm showing with this set review is that I kind of believe that white is a color that wants to play enchantments, and that the reanimation stuff I'm not as big of a fan of, and the toy power 2 or less stuff I'm not as big of a fan of. I think the power in white and a lot of the power in this set is going to be having rooms in your deck. I think basically you just want to have as many rooms in your deck as possible, and this card pays you off for doing that. It is just a 1-mana 1/1 by itself. I acknowledge this, but your opponent is just going to be sitting there like, oh man, I need to do something about this because I'm going to lose if I just let this thing live forever. Because it's just going to put a bunch of counters on all their creatures, and then I'm going to lose. This card, there's actually the sicko curve out of going this card into the 2-drop room enchantment. That's a common where you get 2+1/+1 counters immediately. That's insane. That is a thing that actually will come up. That will happen. That's actually like a thing that like is going to happen. I would say that if you draft those, if you have 2 of the commons and 1 of these in your deck, that's going to happen once per draft for you. Like that's how frequently that type of start can happen. And so this is that's sort of the upside that this card's providing. Orphans of the Wheat. 1 and a white for a 2/1. When Orphans of the Wheat attacks, tap any number of untapped creatures you control. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature tapped this way. I'm just not buying it, man. Like, I just am not buying it. Like, so on turn 3, you play your 3-drop, tap it with this, attack as a 3/2. Okay, that's not even that good, first of all. Second of all, then you have no defense. Yes, the survival payoffs all trigger, but then you have nothing to actually block, and then your opponent is just going to hit you for 8 or whatever. I don't know. To me, this just seems really not relevant at all, and like something I don't want to play in my deck because it's a 2-mana 2/1. Overlord of the Mistmoors, 5 white for a 6/6 with impending for 2 and 2 white. When it enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 insect creature tokens with flying. So if you pay 4 mana, this technically enters the battlefield, and you get 2/2/1 flyers immediately, and then you take a counter off at your end step. So yeah, this card's great. You can, like, again, if the reanimate stuff, like, this is sort of the type of reanimator card that I actually want because it's just good to, it provides a flexible option for you to do something else with it earlier in the game. The earlier mode, like, getting 2/2/1s with flying for 4 mana is a pretty good rate. It's better than they would be willing to print at Uncommon, I think. So that's sort of the type of rate we're talking about. And eventually this just takes over the game and your opponent has to answer it. So, looks really good to me. Patched Plaything. 2 and a white for a 4/3 with double strike. It enters with 2 -1/-1 counters if you cast it from your hand. Again, kind of reiterating the not believing in reanimation thing, like my stance on that. Now, there is one thing that there's one combo that this works with that I actually do believe in, and we'll get to it in a bit. There's a room enchantment in white that reanimates something mana value 3 or less. That's kind of what you are supposed to do with this. The problem is, it doesn't work. Like, honestly, the hard part is getting this into the graveyard. The hard part is not going to be like I have a reanimation spell to cast and make a 4/3 double strike for, you know what I mean? Like, that's not going to be the hard part. The hard part is actually getting it so that it's in the graveyard when you actually want it to be there, as opposed to just, it's turn 8, I got to reanimate my 5/3. It's like, okay, well, that's cool, like, whatever, who cares? Like, I just cast my lightning bolt on it again, and now it's dead. Like, that's kind of the, obviously lightning bolt not real, but there's the exile, deal 3 in red, which is going to be sick, by the way. That card's going to be really good. So this is going to be, this is also going to be not something I'm excited about. Possessed Goat, single white mana for a 1/1. You can pay 3 to discard a card and put 3 1/1 counters on it, and it becomes a black demon in addition to its other colors and types. Activate only once. So this is your way of theoretically binning your large reanimation creatures. I kind of just have all the reanimator stuff in tier 4 because I'm like, you can play it in a reanimator deck if reanimator is functional, but it doesn't go in any other deck, and I don't even think this is that good in the reanimator deck. Like, God forbid your opponent has a removal spell. When you do this and they kill your goat and you just went down a card and then couldn't reanimate something, I don't know. If the reanimator deck is actually functional, this will be playable in that deck. It will not be playable anywhere else. Reluctant Role Model. 1 and a white for a 2/2. It has survival. So at the beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, you put a flying lifelink or +1/+1 counter on it, and whenever it or another creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, put those counters on up to 1 target creature. Notably, you can put them on your opponent's creatures, which can come up. And we saw the card with the -1/-1 counters on it previously. Kind of a sick combo. If that thing dies, you get to kill one of their things maybe. So like combinations, not super relevant, but probably comes up once in a format type thing. Yeah, this is obviously a good 2-drop. It's very threatening. Unlike the one that just gets flying, this one continues to get value over the course of the game and improves. And also, just, if it gets in and gets a flying counter, and then you play your 3-drop and your opponent then kills it, your 3-drop then gets to have flying for the rest of the game. That's pretty good. Like, that's a really good thing to have. So, just seems like a really strong 2-drop. Could even just be tier 1 because, like, whatever. The problem is that it's a 2/2, and that's kind of the problem. Savior of the Small. 3 and a white for a 3/4. At the beginning of your second main phase, if it is tapped, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to your hand. This just isn't it, right? So 4 mana 3/4. It's just too slow, right? Like you're just never getting this off. If there ever is a risk of you actually doing this, your opponent can just kill it. There's a red common deal 4 that just eats this alive, and that's gonna be one of the best cards in the set. So this is just gonna never do anything, I don't think. So yeah, I'm just off this. I think this is very bad. I just think this is very, very bad. Seized from Slumber, 4 and a white for an instant. The spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a tapped creature. Destroy target creature. So we've seen these effects many times. This I think is the best one. We've had this exact card, but as a sorcery, being an instant significant upgrade, obviously, because you get to use your mana more efficiently, and sometimes your opponent's creatures are tapped, and sometimes they aren't. And this card just helps you. Again, not premium removal or anything, just playable, but more playable than this effect usually is. I think this one is going to show up frequently. Shard Mage's Rescue. Single white mana for an enchantment. It is an aura. It has flash. You enchant a creature you control. As long as it entered the battlefield this turn, enchanted creature has hexproof. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. So this is just an upgraded Snakeskin Veil, which is already a very good card. It's an aura. Like, I'm tempted to move this up to tier 1. This is a really, really strong card. It's easy to hold up on mana. It's basically impossible for your opponent to ever play around this. It triggers all your enchantment stuff, ETB stuff. Maybe we just do bump it up to tier 1. It's really strong. It's very, very strong. It does have the thing where it plays worse in multiples, which is you could be like, oh, that's why it's not tier 1. It may just win over 60% of its games. That's a thing that could happen with this card. But yeah, this is just a really, really strong card in the set, and is going to be extremely difficult to deal with. Sheltered by Ghosts. 1 and a white for an enchantment. Aura. Enchant creature you control. When it enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0, has lifelink and ward 2. So we've seen this before. This is a enchantment, like an aura that exiles a creature and gives the creature that it's attached to some additional benefits. Again, it's conditional on you having a creature. Not that hard to have a creature and then have a 2-mana removal spell that hits anything. Giving it lifelink, lifelink good and limited, people have said. I've been told many times. So I think that this is going to be one of the best cards in white, and yeah, just seems really, really strong to me. Shepherding Spirits. 4 white for a 4/5 with flying and plane cycling for 2. So the white one of these, there's a whole cycle of these. I think this is one of the more... all of them are... I think I put all of them in tier 4, except for maybe the green one, because it's, green cares the most, I think, about it being in the graveyard. I don't know. These 2-cost land cyclers tend to not be very good, and I don't see any reason why these are going to be good in this set. They're playable. They're always playable, because they do sort of, help you with not with having stuff to do in the late game and in your mana early, but, this one is maybe more playable because of reanimation stuff. I just, again, don't believe it. I'm going to need to see it to believe it. Split Up. 1 white, white for a sorcery. You can choose one. Destroy all untapped creatures or destroy all tapped creatures. So, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really have a good gauge for how good this is going to be. In some games, it's going to be insane. I think the double pip nature of it, I think, gives me at least a little bit of a signal that it's not going to be as good as some people think. It's probably going to get a little bit overdrafted potentially. As you know, if you've watched any of my set reviews before or any of my content, you know I'm not really a Wrath guy. I don't really like playing Wraths. It's just not the style of game I like to play. So it's going to be worse for me than some people. I think it's fine, but I don't think it's busted by any means. Split Skin Doll. 1 and a white for a 2/1. When it enters, draw a card, then discard a card unless you control another creature with power 2 or less. So this obviously is very, very strong. It's just a good 2-drop. So like you can just play this on 2, and then you're getting your Delirium enabled. Obviously a looter for 2 is not great, as we just saw in the last set. But the fact that this in the late game could just draw you a card and be a 2/1, pretty good. And it's just the flexibility it provides is very strong, and I like it a lot for that reason. It does, again, this is another thing, like this is how you enable your Reanimator stuff. You get to play this on 2 and then discard your thing. The problem is uncommon, so and it's just good in any deck, so all the decks are going to take it and you're not going to have access to it. Surgical Suite, which is 1/2 of the room, 1 and a white. When you unlock this door, return target creature card mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then Hospital Room, 3 and a white. Whenever you attack, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. Another room that looks really strong to me. So both of these modes are situational, right? Like you wouldn't play so we've seen Surgical Suite as a card before. Essentially, it has like a sorcery with this effect on it, and it tends to not be very good. Similarly, the Hospital Room effect would be marginal, but the fact that you get both of them on the same card is a lot of value, and it gets 2 enchantment fault, like 2 eerie triggers, and like just seems like a really difficult card to deal with for your opponent when you play this. Like on turn 4, there's just a lot of game states where on turn 4 you play this, attack with your 3-drop, and you're attacking with like a 4/4 on 3 a lot of times. So like that's a lot. That's like a lot to deal with for your opponent. That's going to get out of hand pretty quickly. So I like this card quite a bit. Toby, Beastie Befriender. 2 and a white for a 1/1. When it enters, you create a 4/4 white beast creature token. With this creature can't attack or block alone. As long as you control 4 or more creature tokens you control have flying. I don't think the creature token, like, that last line I'm not super concerned about. I'm really more concerned about how good is 3 mana 1/1 plus 4/4 that can't attack or block alone. The Mog Flunky's text. The Mog Flunky's text is interesting because it's difficult to evaluate and it is very format context dependent. The attack alone part is kind of the hard part because you would love to just be able to attack with just your 4/4. Because then what happens is your opponent can play like a 2/3 and then you can't attack with the Toby. Like you can't attack with the 4/4 without also attacking with something else, and then so I think there's like enough awkwardness with the 4/4 that can't attack or block alone that I'm actually downgrading this a tier, because normally obviously it would be a tier 1 card if it didn't have that text on it. But I think I'm downgrading it a bit just because the not being able to attack or block alone is really going to come up, I think, quite a bit. Like I think that's going to be not as trivial. There's going to be some game states where like you play a 2-drop, you play this, you're just winning, right? You just get to win the game because you get to attack with your 2-drop and your 4/4. But like your opponent can trade off, your opponent can kill this thing. I'm cautious about grading this in tier 1, and so I didn't put it there. But could be wrong, right? You could just always be wrong about the Mog Flunkies thing. It's just one of those things that like that downside is more, I think, than it originally reads. Trapped in the Screen. 2 and a white for an enchantment with word 2. When it enters, exile target artifact, creature, or an enchantment, and opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So essentially a Banishing Light. Banishing Light had its worst performance of all time in Bloomburrow. It was a bad format for Banishing Light. It had a tough time. This card is obviously an upgrade on Banishing Light. Not, I guess it's not obviously an upgrade because it doesn't hit everything. It doesn't hit Planeswalkers, I think, is the only thing it actually misses. But Ward 2 is a huge upgrade, and the fact that it's an enchantment matters in this set. It didn't matter in Bloomburrow as much, and in this set it's going to matter a lot more. So it's going to be a better card in this set. Will I have it as one of my top commons? We'll see. Well, it remains to be seen how I feel about that. Unidentified Hover Ship. 1 white for a 2/2 with flying. When it enters, exile up to one target creature with toughness 5 or less. When it leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner manifests dread. So, this is like a Banisher Priest on steroids. It's not the easiest thing for your opponent to kill. It has Crew 1 and is a flying vehicle, which is pretty good. And actually, the Crew 1 is going to be really strong if you have any survival creatures in your deck, which I don't think you're going to have a ton of because I don't think the mechanic's very good. But if it's good, or if you just have some like random stuff in your deck because you needed a couple of extra cards, this is going to help enable those pretty well. Now, you know me, I'm a mana cost guy. I look at the mana cost and I say, white, that's scary. How much is that going to impact? And I think it will impact quite a bit here, right? So but it's not a card you have to play on turn 3. In fact, playing it on turn 3 might not be the best time to play it. There are going to be games where you can't cast it, but that's okay. I mean, like Skyclave Apparition was a very good card. It was, I think, worse in Limited than in Constructed, but I would say that it's probably still pretty good. Yeah, so Skyclave was almost a tier 1 card. I went back and checked. This is going to be, I think, slightly better than Skyclave, so I'm putting it in tier 1. Unsettling Twins, 3 and a white for a 2/2, and it enters Manifest Dread. Very simple, but man, this does a lot. We've seen the 4 mana 2/2 make another 2/2 mode, just be good. And I mean, hard to argue, right? Manifest Dread is a great mechanic. It does, not the best in multiples, right? Like, we got thrilled about, turning one of these up with Manifest Dread token. But I mean, this is just going to be a good card. I think this is just very obviously a strong common, and I think you're going to play this in any deck, any white deck. Unwanted Remake. Single white mana for an instant. Destroy target's creature. It's a controller Manifest Dread. So, I have broken out a grade that is not on my list of grades. It is tier 6. It is below unplayable. I think this card is an abomination. I think the best use of this card genuinely is killing your own 1/1 token and turning it into a 2/2. So, I think that genuinely might be the best way to use this card. You just can't... Like, I understand it's 1 mana. You just can't be giving your opponent Manifesting Dread to remove their creature. Like, you're just going down a whole card. You're going down, like, more than a whole card. With this interaction, it's a destroy. If it was exile, you could start talking to me. You can be like, oh, exile. No, it's destroy. They can recur it from the graveyard. They can still get it back. Yeah, this is not good. So don't play it, basically. Veteran Survivor, single white mana for a 2/1. Survival at the beginning of your second main phase. If it's tapped, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. As long as there are 3 or more cards exiled with it, it gets +3/+3 and has hexproof. So, Graveyard Hate is going to be very relevant in this format. This card is going to be difficult for this to perform as Graveyard Hate because it's a 1 mana 2/1 and they can just get blocked and your opponent can trade off. And like I could bump this down. I'm still debating whether this is tier 2 and tier 3. I'm kind of helping to by talking it out right now. The thing that's leaning me towards tier 2 is that there isn't a lot of Graveyard Hate in the set, and this being Graveyard Hate, even though it's bad Graveyard Hate, is inherently strong. It's not unreasonable to expect this to whatever. And again, there are vehicles, there's other ways to tap stuff. There's not a ton, and I don't think the deck's going to be very good. So maybe we just bump it down 1 tier. It's such an above rate. It's just a high above rate 1 drop is kind of the problem It's kind of like part of the reason it's here. It's like a 1 mana 2/1. Like, is that already a tier 3 card? Not in 2024, but you could talk yourself into it. You know what I mean? Like, you could talk yourself into it. I'm actually gonna move it down a tier. It's been moved down a tier. The reason I moved it down a tier, it just dies too often before it does anything. Like, the fact that it has to exile 3 cards, I think, to get the buff, I think is a lot. That means it has to survive 3 attacks, or you have to find a way to tap it 3 times. Maybe in some decks that's feasible, but I don't think that's going to be true in the average white deck. And the final white card is the Wandering Rescuer. 3 white for a 3/4 flash, convoke double strike. Other tapped creatures you control have hexproof. So, to me, this is just a lot of stats for not a lot of mana. 5 mana 3/4 double strike is on the expensive side with flash, but it's not like crazy to think. It's one of those cards that I think reads worse than maybe it plays. Like, when I read it the first time, I was like, is this really that strong? And then I was like, no, this just does a lot of small things like really, really well. And I think for that reason, I'm putting it in tier 1. I think just this is actually the best way to tap your stuff in the set. It's a mythic, so you're never going to see it, but you know, it's actually good in that deck. But I think it's going to just be good in any white deck, and it's going to just be really hard to deal with because you can't really block this well ever. There's not really a good way to block it. And yeah, I think it's just a strong overall card that plays well at instant speed and all that good stuff. So I'm going to leave it in tier 1, and maybe that's too high, but I believe in it. So that's it. That's the white part of the set review. Please check out the other parts of the set review if you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time.